Jesus gave one specific medal to one person. Not the 12 apostles gathered around a fire. Not a crowd on a hillside straining to hear him over the wind. One person alone with him in private, and that person was Mary Magdalene. He told her exactly where on her body to wear it, and he told her why. The reason had a name, one you felt before, even if nobody ever taught you the word for it. The old teachings called it archonic interference. Archons, in the oldest spiritual traditions, aren't demons with pitchforks. They're interference. Static in the signal between you and anything higher, anything clearer, anything real underneath the noise of your own daily life. And Jesus didn't just teach people how to recognize that static. He gave Mary Magdalene a physical answer to it. You know that feeling? The one where you walk into a room and something feels off, even though nothing's actually wrong. The one where you're exhausted after being around certain people, like they pulled something out of you without ever touching you. The static in your chest right before something bad happens, the kind that shows up hours before the bad news does. You felt it. I know you have. Everyone watching this has felt it at least once this week, probably more than once. That feeling had a real answer, once, passed hand to hand, never written down on any scroll that survived. I've spent a long time looking into what got left out of the official story, not because I distrust everything I was ever taught, but because I've noticed a pattern that's hard to unsee once you notice it. The parts of the story that get erased are almost always the parts that would have given ordinary people too much power over their own protection. Too much power that didn't run through a temple, a priest, or an institution collecting a tithe. And this, I believe, is one of those parts. Tonight, I'm going to walk you through what that medal is, why Jesus gave it specifically to Mary Magdalene, and why the instruction was always, without exception, to wear it on the left. I'll also give you the complete instruction, step by step, exactly the way the teaching intended it to be followed, not just the idea of it. By the end of this, you're going to understand why I believe this wasn't superstition dressed up in old language. I think it was one of the last pieces of real, working spiritual technology that almost didn't survive the centuries between then and now. Stay with me. This gets better the deeper we go, and the ending is worth the wait. Let me ask you something honestly, and I want you to actually sit with the answer instead of rushing past it. When you hear the name Mary Magdalene, what's the first image that comes to mind? For most people, it's whatever centuries of bad translation and worse politics left behind. A footnote, a side character standing just off the edge of the frame in every painting. Someone defined by what she supposedly did wrong, instead of what she actually knew, what she actually carried, what she was actually trusted with. I don't buy that version. I never have, and the more I've read, the more convinced I've become that the version most of us inherited was built to shrink her on purpose. In several of the texts that didn't make it into the version of scripture most of us grew up with, texts found buried in the Egyptian desert, sealed in clay jars, hidden away for almost 2,000 years before anyone stumbled across them again, Mary Magdalene isn't a minor figure at all. She's described as the one Jesus trusted with teachings he didn't hand out to the others. Not because he loved her more in some romantic, gossip column sense that people love to project onto ancient texts. Because she was ready. Because she could hold what the others weren't ready to hold yet, including whatever he knew about the archons, the interference most people never even learned to notice, let alone name. There's a reason the deepest spiritual teachings, across almost every tradition on this earth, were never handed out in writing first. They were spoken, passed mouth to ear, hand to hand, from someone who already carried the weight of it to someone who had proven they were ready to carry it too. Writing something down makes it public property. Public means diluted. Public means it gets twisted by whoever copies it next, whoever translates it 3 languages later, whoever has a political reason to bury it the century after that. I think that's exactly what happened here, and I don't think it happened by accident. You have to understand, the early centuries after Jesus were not calm, orderly, agreed-upon history sitting quietly in a museum case. They were a war over who got to control the story going forward. Councils argued for decades, sometimes violently, about which texts counted as scripture and which ones got condemned, buried, or burned outright. And it is not a coincidence, in my opinion, that so many of the texts that survived quietly outside that official record center on Mary Magdalene as the one who understood something the others were still missing. Call that a coincidence if you want. I don't, and I've stopped pretending I do just to sound neutral. What I think actually happened is simpler than any grand conspiracy. Jesus taught in 2 layers, the way most real teachers throughout history have. There was the public teaching, parables, healings, things meant for crowds who weren't ready for anything heavier. And there was the private teaching, given only to those who had proven, through years of proximity and trust, that they could hold it without misusing it. Mary Magdalene was in that second, smaller circle. I'd go further. I think she may have led it. And one of the things carried in that private layer wasn't a parable at all. It was practical. It was physical. It involved a specific metal, worn on a specific side of the body, for a specific, deliberate reason that had nothing to do with fashion and everything to do with function. That's not the kind of detail people usually invent when they're making up a legend from scratch. Legends tend to stay vague, easy to reshape. This detail is oddly, almost uncomfortably specific. And specific details like that tend to survive across centuries precisely because they came from somewhere real. There was a moment, small and quiet, that almost nobody knows about. A small room. Stone walls that still hold the day's heat, even though the sun went down hours ago. One oil lamp on a low table, flickering more than it glows, throwing more shadow across the room than actual light. The smell of dust and old cloth hangs in the air, and somewhere outside, the city has gone quiet. The specific kind of quiet that only settles in during the hour right before something important happens. Mary is sitting close. Not because it's improper for the time, because what's about to be said isn't meant to travel past the walls of this room, and both of them know it. Jesus doesn't raise his voice. He never does in moments like this one. He reaches into the fold of his robe and takes out something small, a band of reddish metal, dulled slightly with age, still warm from being carried close to his body all day long. He doesn't hand it to her the way you'd hand someone an ordinary object across a table. He places it directly into her open palm and closes her fingers around it himself, his hand over hers for just a moment longer than it needs to be. There are almost no words exchanged. That's the part that gets me every single time I picture this scene in my head. No long speech. No explanation with footnotes attached. Just a few sentences, spoken quietly enough that even someone standing just outside the door wouldn't have caught a single word of it. He tells her to wear it. Not on the right hand, not on the right wrist. On the left. Against the skin, close to the pulse, where she'd feel her own heartbeat pressing against the metal every time she went still. And then the moment passes, almost too quickly, the way the most important moments in life often do. The lamp keeps flickering low. The night keeps moving forward like nothing extraordinary just happened at all. But something did happen. Something that would ripple forward for 2,000 years in whispers, in folk memory, in scattered fragments that almost got lost more than once along the way. That's the whole scene, and I kept it small on purpose, because I genuinely believe that's exactly how it would have looked in real life. Real spiritual transmission almost never looks cinematic. It looks like two people in a quiet room, and an object changing hands between them in near silence. Notice what's actually encoded inside that moment, if you slow down long enough to sit with it. It wasn't a scroll. It wasn't a scripture that could be copied, mistranslated, or edited by a council 200 years later. It was metal, something physical, something you could touch every single day without needing to read it or interpret it. He wasn't just handing her protection in some vague, general sense. He was handing her a defense against something specific. The archons, the interference he'd spent his whole ministry trying to teach people to see past, to recognize, to not mistake for their own thoughts and their own exhaustion. Touch doesn't get mistranslated the way language does. Metal doesn't get quietly rewritten by whoever happens to be in power the following century. I think that's exactly why this piece of the teaching survived at all, even in whispers, even in scattered fragments, while so much else got buried, burned, or reshaped into something safer for whoever was in charge. You can't edit a bracelet. You can only pass it down, hand to hand, or lose it forever. Now let's actually talk about what this metal was protecting against, because I don't want to leave that word floating out there without grounding it in something you can actually recognize in your own daily life. Forget the academic version of archons. Forget the complicated diagrams and the Greek vocabulary. Here's what it means in plain terms, the way I'd explain it to a friend over coffee. In the older Gnostic-adjacent teachings, the ones that existed alongside early Christianity, sometimes weaving through it, sometimes clashing hard against it, archons are interference. Not demons with pitchforks waiting in the dark. Static in the signal between you and something higher, something clearer than the noise of daily life. Their function is simple and specific. Keep you distracted, drained, and disconnected from anything real underneath the surface. You already know this feeling. I promise you do. It's that scroll you didn't mean to do for 45 minutes that left you feeling worse, emptier, more scattered than when you first picked up your phone. It's the argument that seems to come out of nowhere and leaves you shaking for an hour afterward. It's waking up tired even after 8 full hours of sleep, like something quietly drained you overnight instead of letting you actually rest. It's the low hum of anxiety that has no clear source, just there sitting underneath everything else you're trying to do that day. That's not random bad luck. That's not just life being hard. The old teaching named that feeling directly and gave it a mechanism instead of leaving it as a mystery. Certain frequencies, certain patterns of energy, attention, and noise are shaped by nature or by intention to keep you scattered, to keep you small, to keep you reaching for your phone one more time instead of reaching inward. The old teaching was never about fighting some dramatic external enemy with a sword in a desert somewhere far away. It was about shielding your own signal, right here, in the middle of an ordinary life. Here's the part of the teaching most people never get told, because it usually gets cut out along with everything else that made this practical instead of poetic. Archonic interference doesn't strike you like lightning. It attaches. It latches onto your own field, your own electrical hum, the one your heart and your nervous system are putting out every second, whether you notice it or not, and feeds on it quietly from the inside, instead of attacking you from the outside. That's why it never feels like an event. It feels like a leak. Slow, constant, easy to ignore until you're already drained and you can't remember when it started. And this is exactly where the metal Jesus gave her stops being symbolic and starts being functional. The metal is copper, not chosen by accident and not chosen for its color. Copper conducts. An unshielded field is an open field, nothing conducting, nothing moving, nothing redirecting what's landing on you, so whatever attaches stays attached. It roots. But copper, worn against the skin, doesn't let anything sit still on it. It doesn't hold a charge quietly the way your own tired, overstretched nervous system does at the end of a long week. It moves what touches it, constantly, quietly, without you having to do a single thing except wear it. That's the actual mechanism underneath all of this. Not copper fights evil. Copper doesn't let interference settle long enough to take root in the first place. It keeps your own signal moving instead of letting something else quietly borrow it. That's what the old teaching claimed. In plain terms, once you strip away the centuries of vague mysticism people layered on top of it, and once I understood the claim that specifically, copper stopped feeling like folklore to me and started feeling like a tool someone built on purpose. So why copper specifically? Out of every metal available to 2 people standing in 1st century Judea, gold, silver, iron, bronze, why did the teaching center on copper? Not the rarest metal, not the flashiest one, the one already sitting in ordinary hands, in ordinary tools, in ordinary households up and down that region. I've thought about this choice a lot, and here's where I'll tell you plainly what I actually believe, not just what the old fragments hint at. Copper conducts. That's not mysticism. That's just physics, plain and testable. It's one of the most conductive metals that exists, which is exactly why it's still running through nearly every wire in your house right now. It doesn't just sit there being decorative. It moves energy. It responds to whatever's near it. Now hold that thought next to something else that stopped me cold the first time I really looked into it. Across cultures that had zero contact with each other, ancient Egypt, parts of the ancient Near East, various folk traditions scattered across Europe, copper shows up again and again in ritual and protective use. Worn on the body, placed near thresholds, used in ceremonies meant to mark a boundary between the ordinary and the sacred. That's a pattern repeating itself across completely disconnected peoples who never once spoke to each other, and patterns like that are usually pointing at something true. I don't think that repetition is an accident. I think it's ancient people noticing something real about the body, long before anyone had the vocabulary of physics to explain why. Here's my honest take, and you're welcome to disagree with me. I don't think this is superstition dressed up as mysticism. I think it's forgotten physics, wearing older language because that's the only language available at the time. The body runs on electrical signals. Your heart runs on them, every second you're alive. Your entire nervous system runs on them. And I believe the old teachers understood something about how a conductive metal, worn close to the skin, interacts with that field. Even if they described what they were noticing using spiritual language instead of the scientific language we'd reach for today. Jesus didn't hand Mary a random object he happened to have in his pocket. He handed her something chosen with real precision. Reddish, warm-toned, highly conductive, historically tied across multiple unconnected traditions to protection and sacred use. That's not coincidence, stacking on top of coincidence. That's a deliberate choice, passed down through a teaching that understood exactly what it was doing. This wasn't protection against bad luck in some vague sense. This was built, specifically, against archonic attachment, against that slow leak we already talked about, and that specificity is exactly why the metal wasn't random, and why the placement wasn't an afterthought. And I think that's precisely why this detail managed to survive at all, in whispers, in scattered fragments, because it wasn't just symbolic decoration. It worked, or at the very least, enough people across enough generations believed strongly enough that it worked to keep passing it forward instead of letting it quietly die out. Now here's the part almost everyone gets wrong when this teaching gets repeated secondhand. It's not just wear copper, it's wear it on the left. That single word, left, is not decoration. It's the entire point of the whole teaching. Across esoteric traditions, Kabbalistic thought, older alchemical symbolism, Eastern energy systems that developed continents away with no contact with any of this, even old European folk belief passed down through grandmothers who never wrote any of it in a book. The left side of the body is consistently treated as the receptive side, the side that takes in. The right side, in most of these same traditions, is treated as the side of action, of giving out. The left is the side of receiving, intuition, listening, quiet absorption. Think about it anatomically for a second, too, because this part isn't symbolic at all. It's just true. The left side sits closest to the heart. Not symbolically, literally, physically closer, every single time you check. If you're going to wear something meant to shield your inner signal from everything trying to hijack it, doesn't it make sense that tradition after tradition, completely independent of each other, pointed to the exact same side of the body, the side nearest the source, nearest the pulse? If the archon's attached to your field quietly from the inside, then the side of the body that receives is exactly where you'd want to interrupt that attachment first, before it has a chance to root, before it becomes the low hum you carry around all week without knowing where it started. I think this is one of the most quietly brilliant details in the entire teaching, and it's the one people skip past the fastest because on the surface it sounds like a small technicality. It's not small. It's the instruction that makes the whole thing actually work. Copper on the right arm is just decoration at that point. Copper on the left, resting against the pulse, close to the heart, is a teaching being lived out silently on your own body every single day. That's why Jesus didn't just hand Mary an object and leave the rest up to guesswork. He gave her a placement, a direction, a completed instruction, not half of one left for her to figure out alone. So here's where I land, after everything we've walked through together tonight. I'm not telling you a piece of copper on your wrist is going to fix your entire life overnight. I'm not telling you your bills disappear, your relationships heal themselves, or your anxiety vanishes the second metal touches skin. That's not what this is, and if anyone ever tells you that with total certainty, be skeptical of them, not just of me. Anyone selling you a guarantee is selling you something other than the truth. What I am telling you is this. There was a teaching, old, quiet, almost lost entirely more than once across 2,000 years of fires, councils, and buried texts, about protecting the signal of your own attention from everything designed to scatter it, drain it, or hijack it before you even notice it's happening. It was given to someone who had already proven she could be trusted to carry it forward without turning it into a performance or a product. It involved a real, conductive metal, chosen with more care than people usually give this story credit for. And it involved a placement that lines up, again and again, across traditions that never once spoke to each other, never traded ideas, never influenced one another, and still landed on the exact same answer. That's the part that keeps me up at night, honestly. Not the mysticism of it, the consistency of it. So let's actually do this properly, the way the teaching intended, not just the watered-down version that gets repeated in passing without any of the actual steps attached. Skin contact matters. This was never meant to sit over a sleeve or a shirt cuff, tucked under fabric where it can't do anything except sit there looking nice. It was meant to touch you directly, because the whole point was your own pulse meeting the metal, not fabric standing in between the two. If what you have is a ring, a bracelet, or even just a plain coin, let it rest against bare skin. Nothing else works the same way, and I don't want you doing this halfway and then telling me it didn't do anything. Timing matters too. Put it on tonight, before you sleep, and leave it there through the night if you can manage it. Sleep is when your own guard is down the most, when your attention naturally stops defending itself, and everything you carried all day finally gets a chance to settle, for better or worse. That's exactly the window this was built for. Not the middle of a loud afternoon. The quiet hours when you're least equipped to notice what's attaching to you. And before you put it on, take one slow breath first. Just one. Not a performance, not a ritual with candles and chanting, not something you need to film or post about. Just one breath and a simple, honest thought, something as plain as I'm closing the leak tonight. The old teaching was never about the object sitting on your wrist by itself, doing all the work while you scroll through your phone next to it. It was about the object plus your own attention meeting it, even for a single second, even if that second is the only conscious moment you give it all night. One more thing worth knowing, so it doesn't confuse you later and make you think something's gone wrong. Copper darkens over time. It reacts, it oxidizes, it changes color the longer you wear it, sometimes faster than you'd expect. Tradition has always read that not as damage, not as something to be embarrassed about or polish away immediately. It's read as the metal doing exactly what it was given to you to do. Let it darken. That's not a flaw in the practice. That might be the practice working. I think the reason this detail survived at all, in fragments, in whispers, in texts that almost got burned out of history completely, is because enough people, across enough centuries, actually tried it and felt something shift, even slightly, even quietly. Maybe that's belief working on the body in ways we don't fully understand yet. Maybe it's something more literal, tied to the electrical field your own heart runs on every second of every day. I hold both possibilities with real respect, and I'd genuinely rather you sit with the question yourself than have me hand you a tidy conclusion wrapped in a bow, because tidy conclusions are usually where the truth gets flattened. What I won't do is pretend this doesn't matter to me, because it does. I think Jesus and Mary Magdalene shared something in that quiet room that was never meant to be shouted from a hillside, only carried forward, hand to hand, wrist to wrist, generation to generation, by whoever was ready to hold it without dropping it or diluting it into something safer and smaller. That's what this was always about, in the end. Not fighting archons with force, not some dramatic spiritual battle fought in the open. Making sure they never had anywhere quiet left to attach in the first place, so the leak never gets the chance to start. You're one of the people it reached tonight. That's not nothing. Before you go, I want to say something to you honestly. What you just heard is the filtered version, shaped so it could actually exist on this platform. This channel has already been demonetized, which means nothing is keeping this work alive anymore. History has shown us what happens to teachings like this one, buried, repackaged, quietly erased over time. I'm not diluting this message. I'm not bending it into something safer or more comfortable. I'm not slowing down either. If anything, I'm doubling down. But I have to be honest, I cannot carry this alone. I need your support to keep it alive. If something has opened your eyes even slightly tonight, click the link in the description and join me on Patreon. You'll get immediate access to unfiltered, raw, member-only videos, extended audio teachings, and esoteric material that will never be posted here. Most will scroll past this in the next 5 seconds. You will not.